G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day and so far a fantastic start to your week. Today is one of the most important days on the calendar. Of course, the 11th of November is Remembrance Day. This is when the armistice of World War I was signed. Today, take a moment of silence for those who fought for our freedom and those tens, hundreds, millions of men who never returned home in war. Take a moment of silence, remember it, and be grateful for this and that we are not fighting in something like that currently. Well, at least not the majority of us, and lest we forget. So, legends, let's get into the main piece of the video today, but that is incredibly important. So today, we're going to look at maps, we're going to look at attacks, we're going to see where ground is shifting, we're going to look at fortifications, and of course, geolocated footage to give us an idea of where things are shifting. There's been a phone call between President-elect Trump, President Putin. We're going to talk about that, how I see it, some consistencies, some inconsistencies, and we'll get a better idea as time goes on. I want to look at aircraft. I also want to talk about Kursk. Of course, it has been for some time said that Russia is going to launch a large-scale offensive into Kursk. So we're going to talk about that, and we're going to debunk some common, maybe, propaganda inconsistencies, things that are reality on the ground, rather than just what is idealistic for the best possible position for troops. So let's talk about that at length. But where I want to start is just as I was getting ready to film, Ukrainian accounts, AMK maps, all of these were saying that many Russian bombers were in the air. At one point, there was 6 Tu-22s, 13 Tu-95s, and 4 MiG-31s. This would have been one of the largest attacks, if not the largest missile attack on Ukraine throughout this entire war. Now, the planes have turned back, and it said that it was just a large-scale simulation of an attack, although every region of Ukraine's air raid sirens went on under missile warning. We have heard for some time that Ukrainian officials has said that Russia is not out of missiles. This is not why we're not seeing them fired as often. Simply, they are stockpiling systems before winter for large attacks to take out systems. And of course, a lot of that critical infrastructure like electricity heading into those colder winter months. For large missile attacks, it's not if, it is when. And we will see those come at some point. I'm not sure exactly. With President Putin and President-elect Trump, maybe there was some discussion about that also. But those simulations, of course, our conclusion from that is Russia will still be launching missiles very likely at one point. Now, I follow UAC, United Aircraft Company. They make the planes for the Russian Air Force. Well, most of the planes at least. Now, they released this video and it's handed over another batch of Su-57, Su-35S. Now, in this, it's a little bit of a proof of life. I watched the video and I go, well, how many does the video actually show? What is a batch? They never give numbers. So it was at least one Su-57 delivered. That's all the video footage showed. I'll keep an update on this if more get delivered. And why we talk about this is we look at the number getting taken down by Ukrainian air defense systems or anti-air systems. We look at mechanical failures of planes as well as pilot errors, and we try and get an idea if Russia is meeting replacement of those planes. It's very hard to get an idea because, of course, of different types of planes, from bombers to fighters to strategic aircraft, whatever, but we believe that Russia is meeting replacement or above replacement, at least in the past, say, 6 months. And I showed you some numbers on that the other day. Now, I want to talk about Kursk, because many people are expecting a new Russian offensive in Kursk. So let's talk about this. So here, of course, we have on the map, we have Ukraine in the center, and then, of course, the capital of Kyiv. We have Ukraine's internationally recognized borders. Now, of course, we have between Sumy in Ukraine, Kursk in Russia, an area which, of course, Ukraine has pushed back across into Kursk and is occupying some ground. Now, it still is not 100% clear of why Ukraine did this. Strategically, in attritional war, it didn't really ever make sense. And I will still say, and maybe this is my limited knowledge on this subject, but I'll still say it has never from day one made sense to me. So, in attritional warfare, which this is attritional protracted warfare, Ground that does not have a vital industrial centre, whether it be a mine, a power plant, a tank plant, whatever, is irrelevant. That's why Vuhledar was so important. Other areas maybe not so important, and why Seledov and Pokrovsk are more important than other areas as well, regardless of size, defensibility, whatever, vital industrial centres. You can just look at the metallurgical coal that is in those areas. And of course, we have the Kursk nuclear power plant. Now, I don't really believe, although I was told that was a goal of someone fairly reliable, I'll just say I think the political fallout of Ukraine going for a power plant and how far in Ukraine needs to go to that, I don't think that was ever a realistic goal. I'm not really sure. I think realistically what Ukraine tried to do here was they saw the situation on the east and that slowly collapsing line that has sped up a lot and gone, we need to bait Russian soldiers out of the south and the east into here, launch an attack to try and draw them away. And we know that has failed. Some units may have been taken off the front in limited, but it has, on large, it's sped up. If you ask me, I know correlation doesn't mean causation, but I believe this has jeopardized other areas. If there are 20,000 soldiers in here, they could definitely be used, I believe, more tactically and strategically in other areas compared to here. Now, we've heard another couple of reasons for this. We have heard that it was preemptively attacking Russia before Russia launched into Sumy. We did see that General Sursky and other officials have said there was somewhere in the realm of 70,000 Russian soldiers getting ready in Kursk to launch into Sumy. Where this falls apart is, well, Russia took, I'd say, the best part, if not over a month, to stabilise the situation in here, get it under control and start shrinking that. Really, to shrink it was started at about 2 months. So that doesn't really hold up. If there was 70,000 guys ready to go on offensive actions here, it wouldn't have had the initial success that it did have or the ability to get the lines that it currently does have. The exchange fund, couple of hundred POWs, couple of hundred killed, and a couple of hundred square kilometres, it's not enough to have massive pull at the negotiating table compared to POWs and other areas occupied too. So I still don't really understand this, but many people are saying that Russia, along with North Korean troops, are getting ready to launch an offensive back into here. So we're going to look over this at length and see if this is true, whether it's not, and what the future will tell us. And we'll look at what the maps are showing too. But this is what I wanted to talk about straight off the bat. Word is that Russia's built up a force of 50,000 troops to take back Kursk. It's not enough, and here is why. Now, I do question the 50,000, and does this include the North Koreans? If they're 10 or 11,000, maybe it's around 60,000, we will see. Now, Ukraine defenders, around 20,000, he says, David here. So 3-to-1 odds, that's 60,000 needed. The 3-to-1 thing, that's more, it's not a real rule. This can go anywhere. 6-to-1 to 1-to-1 to whatever. There's so many factors in this. But I do question if there are 20,000 Ukrainian soldiers in here. I've heard it's more like 10,000, which then the numbers by his own maths would make more sense of this 50 to 10. But again, let's work on 20,000. Now, if Russia do launch an offensive here, will Ukraine stay and fight? And of course, even if Russia takes large losses, Ukraine will take larger losses than currently if they launch a large attack, or withdraw to support the collapsing East. The East, in my opinion, both tactically, strategically, politically, economically, is significantly more important than holding this couple of hundred square kilometres in here. I cannot believe that Ukraine still has soldiers in here. I think the reason is the political fallout of withdrawing out of here, and also if they actually can withdraw. But let's look at why David here believes that Ukraine has the advantage in here. Ukraine is in a defensive posture. So this, he's saying, is a plus to Ukraine. Now, the defensive lines that have been dug and the fortifications in here are questionable. I haven't seen any evidence of really solid defensive fortifications with depth in here. There are definitely some, but it's sure as hell not like the Surovikin line. So I do question how strong those defensive lines are and where we are seeing Russian attacks, and I'll show you some geolocation footage in a bit. Ukraine has better logistics, he says, another plus to Ukraine. Now this I disagree with. This is upon Russian ground. So winter is going to limit Ukraine's movement of logistics into here, where on the other side, Russia will have the trains into Kursk and the roads won't be as cut up as they will be within here. Of course, the amount of fighting that has taken place, the vast majority is in this sector of blue for artillery going both ways, Ukraine moving forward, Russia moving back. The amount out in here is basically untouched. So the roads are going to be better. There's going to be electricity. There's going to be trains. There's going to be more freedom of movement. So I think the logistics in here, and this is a point I've brought up before, are greatly in Russian favour. I don't see this as a plus to Ukraine, especially once winter hits and Ukraine having to cross the border. Ukraine has more and better drone coverage plus to Ukraine. Again, I vehemently disagree with this. Ukraine may have, maybe, a more drone coverage of smaller drones, although I would question that. Smaller drones heading into winter become less effective. They're still very effective, but they become far less effective, not only from the radio control signal, but also the ability to fly in poor conditions. But where I disagree on that is we have seen, and I'll bring this up again, this is the first place Russia has been using the fibre optic drones. We've recently seen them down in Pokrovsk. See yesterday's video for that. So we've seen them testing successfully, it looks like, those fibre optic controlled drones, which of course the signal won't be as affected by bad weather. The weather itself on the propellers, just as much, if not more, it may be heavier. But we have seen Russia using things like the Orlan drones. These large drones, which should be eaten up by man-pads, being used significantly more, guiding in things like the Krasnopol artillery shell. Remember, when this offensive first happened, what I was told of someone on the ground said the nuclear power plant was our goal, but the Russian drone coverage spoiled the attack and saw us very early crossing in here, which footage does show that it was all seen, and it did manage to really halt how far and how much we could actually get across, although in those initial weeks, Ukraine did get a lot of ground. Russia has to attack through mud. He says this is a plus to Ukraine. This is true, but the roads are going to be worse for the logistics on Ukraine's side. The roads around here, this hasn't been as heavily shelled as other areas in the east that have been sitting there for years either. And I don't see why Russia would have to be completely on foot. We're still seeing armoured vehicles move through here, but being on the attack, yeah, you are going to have to go through these areas. It is going to be difficult. But I think that same reason of going through the mud is why it's going to limit supplies in and out of there. I see that still as a minus to Ukraine. Ukraine has artillery coverage, a plus to Ukraine. This is the point I vehemently disagree on the most. As far as who has artillery superiority, whether it is in any point of the front line or especially in Kursk, it is definitely within Russia's favour. This goes into where we're seeing the Krasnopol shells and other units being used by larger drones, of which we don't see used, that Russia can't use in some areas of the front due to the air defence coverage, which is the point under this. But let's stick on the artillery. So we have seen increased use of laser-guided things like Krasnopols. We've seen increased use of FABs. Russia originally didn't want to use FABs because it would destroy their own infrastructure there. We're seeing those used all the way up to the largest FAB 3000. We've also seen a huge increase of the use of Iskanders in this area and across into Sumy as well. Yes, there are HIMARS going across. Ukraine can't use some of the other things like ATACMS far in. That's what they really wanted. As far as artillery coverage, I put that well within a plus to Russia rather than Ukraine. Ukraine has air defense coverage over the area. He says a plus to Ukraine. I, again, vehemently disagree with this point. I believe as far as air coverage, who has more power in the air, what we can look at is the use of those drones, which I've pointed out maybe 5 or 6 times in this, that shortage of man-pads and air defense. And of course, we did see one of the Patriot systems taken out in here by Iskanders, again, which goes back into the Iskanders are a missile, but it's come under the command of artillery, so I'll put that in the artillery basket. I can talk about that policy change if you'd like. We've also seen maybe 2 helicopters taken down in here, and potentially 1 Su-34, although some say that was mechanical failure going to this area. But even if we count that, let's say it was 2 of both. Let's just, for instance, say that. It still doesn't say that the air defense coverage is stopping this compared to the amount of FABs that are being delivered in here, or the use of those guided, what are they called? You can see the thermal footage of the Kar-52s operating here. The air defense coverage, just look at the border. All Ukraine's air defense needs to sit back in here. Russia's considering here there's going to be better coverage. Ukraine's not going to cross air defense systems on the flanks out into Russia or into here. It's going to be limited just on that. And as winter hits, it's going to get more limited again. Those radars are going to be more affected than a 3-ton bomb just flying through bloody snow or bad weather. The battlefield is already blocked and with wrecked vehicles, and Russia will have to move on foot. Now, I don't see this, and we haven't seen this as super relevant in other areas that have had significantly more fighting from here. Yes, some vehicles have blocked areas, of course, but we're still seeing Russia conduct armoured assaults in areas like Vuhledar or out from Vuhledar, Selidov, Kursk, whatever other area, and this hasn't been a huge problem so far due to then like recce mech, engineering vehicles being able to drag those vehicles out of areas, and there's significantly less mining in somewhere like here. Remember, there's areas of the front line that have been sitting there for 10 years. They are mined to shit from Ukrainian mines, Russian mines, from everything throughout this war too. Up in here is not as mined. So for a tank commander, armoured vehicle commander, they will be far more confident to go off-road, break track, go through some area than they would be in the south or the east. I can't see why exactly that would then move. It's only on foot. But remember, for local assaults and then withdrawing, that is also going to be a factor for Ukraine if it is that too. Because if there are then blocked vehicles in these wrecked vehicles in the areas, well, who's they going to be if they're moving forwards? All in all, Russia will need 70 to 100,000 to kick Ukraine out of Kursk at least. Now, I have some other ideas in here. I really think that Russia may want to keep some elements of troops in here because it's meaning that, if you're correct, Dave, it does mean that 20,000 guys are not fighting in the south and the east. Maybe Russia will push back on here, then look to go to negotiation with Trump and say, well, they don't have a square metre of our land. What cards are you bringing to the table for territorial negotiations? But like I've said, I think maybe politically the best move for Russia is to try and push Ukraine out of here. But I think strategically, it's Russia can sit there with elements in defensive and keep 20,000 troops away from areas of the front line where they are having success. Effectively, what Russia can do here, on the flip side of this, if Russia do launch an attack in here and Ukraine are serious about holding this, Ukraine will have to deploy potentially more soldiers into here, which is effectively the same as what Ukraine tried to do to Russia here. Ukraine launching this to try and get Russia to withdraw soldiers from the south and the east. If Russia do launch in here and Ukraine do want to hold it, and they have to supply logistics, weapons, men from other sectors, it's going to have more of an effect on the south and the east. Still, with the manpower crisis in Ukraine that is occurring, if there are 20,000 guys in here, I can't believe that they're being kept in here rather than the areas that is over 120% falling faster than last month, which was the biggest month of losses in 2.5 years. So let's have a look at some of these attacks. Now, I can't show you much of this footage, but there was an armoured attack by the Russian forces in Kursk here, and there were many losses moving forward, although some Russian pages did say, and I got that from a Russian page, that footage originally came from a Ukrainian page showing the targeting and the large losses that Russia took, but saying that, yes, they took large losses, but they still were able to make ground. Again, take that with a grain of salt. But what we do know from that footage is, well, then where, and it was an armoured attack, so it's not on foot, but where was this attack? So it was geolocated to right here. Heavy losses, armoured assault, but out from Pokrovsk. So let's give this something like this, some 2.5 kilometers behind the line. So still moving there. And also you got to remember the psychological effect, morale of actually launching armored assaults as well. Syriac does tell a slightly different story, but in a slightly different area here. Where we looked was where my cursor is here, but we did see Russia took some ground yesterday, but in this district, Ukraine army launched a series of counterattacks and forced Russian army to withdraw from the northern outskirts of this area. Clashes are currently underway at the railway. So Ukraine launched some attacks back where they said Russia had a push too. So let's talk about Kursk from, I believe this was New York Times. Anyway, 50,000 Russians and North Korean troops mass ahead of attacks. Now, we have heard figures like this for a long time. Didn't Russia have the 70,000 guys ready for Sumy? Where did those guys end up in defense in those initial months? Where are they now? Where are you now? No, the Russian military has assembled a force of 50,000 soldiers, including North Korean troops, as it prepares to begin an assault aimed at reclaiming territory seized by Ukraine in the Kursk region of Russia, according to US and Ukrainian officials. The US assessment concludes that Russia has massed the force without having to pull soldiers out of Ukraine's east. That is not a good sign. If they can pull force of 50,000 guys without withdrawing, as they're saying, anyone out of the east, that is a bad problem. Maybe Russia is putting their soldiers here to try and bait Ukraine out of the east into Kursk to have an offensive here or dig more lines or put more weapon systems in there. Like I said, effectively the same as what Ukraine tried to bait Russia in Kursk. Its main battlefield priority, of course, for Russia is in the east. I believe it should also be for Ukraine, allowing Moscow to press on multiple fronts simultaneously. Russian troops have been clawing back some of the territory that Ukraine captured in Kursk this year. They've got a major chunk. Just in October last month, War Mapper said that Russia reclaimed it was 85.9 squared kilometres. I've said 86 as I spread misinformation, apparently. Ukraine captured Kursk this year. Area in Kursk. They've been attacking Ukrainian positions. Russians have been attacking with missile strikes, artillery fire, but they have not yet begun a major assault there. Again, like these ice scans that we have seen into what I spoke about, where I believe the pluses and minuses are. I believe that for numbers, for logistics, for artillery, it's all pluses for Russia in here. And again, strategically, if they were to tie up another 10 to 20,000 Ukrainian forces here and just push harder in the east. That's exactly, go back to my video when this got launched. I said, I don't believe Russia should push back on this. As far as tactically, I said, I wouldn't push back on this. I'd just try and stabilise the line, which Russia would take a long time to stabilise, and I'd push in the east and draw those guys down. Ukrainian officials say they expect such an attack involving the North Korean troops in the coming days. What I believe this could be is that Ukraine need a more palatable way to pull out of Kursk. And saying that this was a mistake pulling out won't sell as well as 50, 60, 70,000 Russian troops and North Koreans came in and we had to withdraw. I think Ukraine needs a way to pull out of here that remains palatable. For now, the North Koreans are training with Russian forces in the far western part of Kursk. Now, there is a video showing a guy of Asian appearance having a munition dropped on him from a drone. Ukrainian pages are saying this is a North Korean soldier. It is now that anyone with Asian appearance at all is now 100% a North Korean. It's like that meme whereas everything is an AR-15 or everything is an AK-47. Someone who looks Asian doesn't necessarily mean it's North Korean. Look at where Russia sits in the world. Look at the different ethnicities of people across that country. The Russian North Korean offensive looms as President-elect Donald Trump prepares to re-enter office with the stated goal of ending the war quickly. We'll talk about that. US military intelligence officials have grown more pessimistic about Ukraine's overall prospects, noting that Russia has steadily gained ground both in Kursk and in eastern Ukraine. Officials say the setbacks are partly a result of Ukraine's failure to solve critical shortfall in troop strength. Well, if there's 20,000 guys up there, that's not helping the east. One Western official said Ukraine's surprise incursion into Kursk thinned out its forces across the battlefield in eastern Ukraine, leaving them vulnerable to Russian advances. If Russia push now up here, if they do push, and I'm still not sure on that, but if they do, more weapons, systems, and men are going to have to go up there, from food to bullets to bombs too. That is going to take them away from the south or the east. But the officials said that US officials said Ukraine had a strong defense in Kursk and might be able to hold, at least for a time. Once winter hits, it's going to get very difficult in here. The Ukrainians captured hundreds of square miles of territory with little opposition. It goes into the idea that there was a large-scale offensive into Sumy being prepared and it was preemptive. But Russia has slowly chipped away at those gains, reclaiming roughly half of the seized territory. So that's half of it back without really looking like it's pulled mighty soldiers, if you listen to these guys, without pulling any, the 50,000 off the south and the east while continuing to advance. American officials believe that Ukrainian troops will prove difficult to dislodge, and the Russian North Korean forces will probably take heavy losses, similar to what Russia suffered in eastern Ukraine. Any offensive will have large losses, and of course it will be difficult to dislodge. This is not going to be a cakewalk for either side in here, but you're looking at what is strategically the best decision. Politically, tactically, things aren't adding up. 2 + 2 is equaling 5 in my head for Kursk. US-British military analysis put the current number of Russian troops deaths and injured at 1,200 a day. I've seen a lot of people sharing stuff again about like, oh, look at the losses and this and that. With any like graphs, whatever, shit in, shit out. We have no idea on these numbers. And even then, how do you get these numbers of a bunker that has been hit by a bomb 30 k's away and goes, that was 12 guys, 1 dog, 1 cat, and 3 mice? We don't know. That said, if Russia gains momentum, it may not stop at its border, but might try and drive Ukrainian forces back further. It is not clear if the North Korean government will authorise its forces to conduct sustained operations in Ukraine, or if they are intended only for the Kursk counteroffensive. Now, I don't care what you say, the West and the rest of the world, although I hate the term West and the rest, but everyone will see it differently if North Korean soldiers are operating in Kursk within Russia's borders than if they are operating within Ukrainian 1991 internationally recognised borders. That will be seen differently. Just like if there was an element of Western troops deployed from NATO into Ukraine, it would be seen differently if they were operating in areas occupied by Russia or on the front line than if they were operating in Kursk. It just would be seen differently. If you don't believe me, then why are American systems, missiles, weapons, tanks, whatever, initially seen as vastly different in one side to the other of that border? Some American officials believe that North Korea could order its troops to stop at the border while Russian forces press deeper into Ukraine. Like I said, it would be seen different. But again, will Russia push into Sumy from here? This could be, again, I've said Kursk offensive by Ukraine is going to be seen as one of two things, not in between. It's either going to be seen as the greatest strategic tactical decision 4D chess game ever played, and that Ukraine have something to follow up and Russia's going to collapse. So it's either going to be seen as the greatest strategic move in the 21st century or the worst strategic move, as it has jeopardized other areas. I don't believe there's any in between. It's going to be seen one or the other. And if Russia was able to push back across into Sumy with 50,000 guys, Ukraine is going to need to redeploy forces that are already thin on other areas up into here, and it could be a catastrophe, all from the butterfly effect of the offensive up here. Again, it's never made sense to me. Now, before we talk about Trump and Putin's phone call, let's have a look at the maps. And this is what I wanted to show you here. So we look at the occupied territory by Deep State, which of course is a pro-Ukrainian map with ties into the MOD. You can see that by both War Mapper, Deep State map, Russia has been exponentially increasing gains. So anyone who says, well, Russia won't be in Kiev, or won't be in X, not Kiev, but Russia won't be here until 50 years down the line, you're assuming a linear trajectory. This is being exponential, but can also go the other way too. You can't have anything linear. But what we have seen is that up to November 11, Russia has occupied almost 240 square kilometres, probably more than this. Deep State is ignoring some areas, but this to the same date, actually one day before, so I'll do it tomorrow again, is 124% faster than the same time of October. So speeding up even faster in October. So let's have a look at the maps. I've already shown the areas. Remember, the red check here is ground that Russia has made over the past 24 hours. Now, you can see this is Vuhledar back here. Seems like a distant memory that the front line was down here. And where Russian forces have gained more ground in spanning the buffer zone to the east of Maximilianivka, as well as Katanivka and Antonivka. Again, right where my cursor is, about a week ago, we saw a Russian armoured convoy moving. Again, the grey zone is further than here, but as far as actually ground, we can see this moving here. No real movement after we saw the collapse of one of the defensive lines in around Kursk. But I want to show you a couple of things. Now, this is this was a Ukrainian armoured raid. We don't really see that many raids anymore. This was by both armoured vehicles, M113s, and drones. I really can't show you much of that footage. But that raid was attacking Russian positions. Okay, so Ukrainian raid against those positions. Russians took large losses by at least the footage. Remember, these footage is cut up to show one way or another. But this is where it was, out from Dalny to the south of Kursk. So you get an idea of where I've put it is right on where my cursor is here, well outside. So there was a Ukrainian assault against Russian positions here. Well, the best part of here. If I'm out by 100 meters, don't worry. So around 2 kilometers past where the front line is saying it is sitting. But of course, this puts them right in the direction of Kursk too. But furthermore, this is more of a problem than just kilometers made. Remember, 1 kilometre somewhere can be less important than 1 inch somewhere else. Voice is breaking. I'm like a 12-year-old boy. We jump onto the Syriac map. Now, he's caught up and showed that this area has filled in to the south of Maximilianivka. Deep State showed this a couple of days. He also shows where that Russian position is that was getting hit by drones and armour. Right in here, the geolocation that I just showed you from the footage. Further, what this shows you is the deep, at least, positions of the Ukrainian major fortifications in here. Now, one of the fortifications has come under control seemingly very easily. This fortification, very close to. But these fortifications out here are made for a northern assault before Kursk. If these have a east to west attack, they will not be as effective. And just like this one right here was for an east to west attack, Russia attacked it north to south, fell very quickly. So if they break through here, we could see this whole area and Kursk really get flanked quickly. I've heard people say before things slow down in the winter, before there are negotiations, Russia want to close. Russia is pushing on Sontanivskia here. There is a position about here that Russia want to flank Kursk, both from the north, fire control across here in Lininka. We know Ukrainian commanders talked that that's what Russia's trying to do. Many people saying Russia's trying to close this up or at least get Kursk before things slow down in winter or before there is any level of further negotiation. Again, that is what I'm seeing many people say who are as unbiased as you can be in this. Of course, everyone carries some level of bias. So that is what we are seeing. Now we move up, we have Selidov. We did show you the other day a Russian armoured assault right about where my cursor is here against this road that of course leads up into Pokrovsk, Minigrad, and we can see that by deep state map today that Russian forces have reached this. And we have a look on Suryak. He's showing very similar, although that these two are connected. I'd say that they likely are connected. Deep state actually shows that Russia has moved beyond this road that Suryak doesn't show. So the M30 highway railway, Russia has at least got to or moved beyond. Also, this all has effects down the line for logistics and X, Y, and Z also. Now, let's have a look in some other areas. We'll keep pushing down to the south. Now, we have Stamorsky, Makarivkia. This area is where really the second prong, the main effort of the Ukrainian 2023 offensive was in Orkiv and Stamorsky. This area in here managed to get about 8 to 10 kilometers. Suryak map says that Russian army has restarted advances north of Stamorsky and entered this locality of Makarivkia. So the best way is we're going to line up where the river is running through here. So we see Suryak is saying that the Russian forces are right in line just about where this has that turn. So right about where my cursor is, that is what Suryak is claiming, that Russia starting that. Remember, what you do in a traditional war, if you have the numerical advantage, is push on as many different front lines as possible simultaneously and successively. Again, this goes into, I don't understand Kursk, and I'm happy to be wrong. I hope that I'm wrong, but I do not understand it. And Russia made some amount of ground in Toretsk as well. But also, this is a problem with this intersection being cut off now down into these blocks. We do know there's definitely been presence of Russian forces in these blocks, and there was a Ukrainian counteroffensive that pushed some of the Russians out of there recently also. Now, we have Chasiv Yar. Now, what we did see the other day was there was a Russian team right around where this grey zone is here, and we can see the grey zone has actually now engulfed some of this. But we did say, go back and have a look, it could have been a reconnaissance team because it didn't seem like that many guys. And it does look like Ukraine has pushed them back. You can line up where these two spoils are here. The Ukrainian army recaptured and counterattacked and recaptured these mines, clashing with the Russian army in the northern hills. So it does look like there was a successful Ukrainian counterattack in this area. Now we need to keep pushing up, and then we have then Terny Torsky area. Now we can see by this, it's saying that in Terny up here, that Russia has gained a little bit more ground. We'll wait and see. The most effective thing Ukraine was able to do was push the Russians back from Zadechny, Torsky in here to not be then effectively strategically cut off because of the waterways running through here. There was a successful counter in there. But as far as maps today, that is what I have for you. Again, I show you relevant strategic footage for bits and pieces. Now let's talk about Trump and Putin and their phone call coming from the Washington Post. Trump talked to Putin, told Russian leader not to escalate in Ukraine. There was a phone call between the two. not to escalate the war in Ukraine, reminded him of Washington's sizable military presence in Europe. The two men discussed the goal of peace on the European continent, and Trump expressed an interest in follow-up conversations to discuss the resolution of Ukraine's war soon. Now, again, it's from people that have spoken on anonymity. So we don't really know exactly what was said. That'll become relevant in a second. In his presidential campaign, Trump said he'd bring an immediate end to the war. He did not offer details about how he intended to do so. He signals privately that he would support a deal where Russia kept some territory, and during the call he briefly raised the issue of land. People familiar with the matter said. So Trump has really two options here. That if he wants to end the war, he's got to either have a deal where land will be seceded, there will be a giving up of land, or massive amounts of military aid into Ukraine, but also committing to at least another 2-3 years of war, if that is possible, with the manpower crisis also, and Ukraine's government's willingness to mobilise men too. That's really the two decisions here. If you want the land, you need to mobilise, and they need to be armed from the US. I don't know. Or there's going to be some cessation. So we will see. Will Trump go one way or the other? And we do know that he can swing very large. Thursday, Trump had spoken to about 70 world leaders since the election, including Volodymyr Zelensky, which people say Elon Musk was on the line as well. Trump's initial calls with world leaders are not being conducted with the support of the State Department and US government interpreters. Trump and his aides are distrustful of career government officials following the leaked transcripts of presidential calls during his first term. They're just calling each other directly. One of the people familiar with the call said. So Putin and Trump just on the bloody blower to each other. Wild. Dmitry Peskov, a Kremlin spokesman, has said that the relations under Trump presidency were positive. Trump talked during his campaign about how he sees everything through deals, that he can make a deal that will lead everyone to peace. At least he talks about peace, not about confrontation and the desire to inflict a strategic defeat on Russia. Again, we heard rhetoric about strategic defeats, but we never saw the amount of aid from the US or NATO going into Ukraine to really facilitate that either. While Biden and Harris' strategy in relation to Ukraine was predictable, Peskov said, Trump is less predictable. And also, it is less predictable to what extent Trump will stick to the statements he made during the election campaign. Let's wait and see. Remember, many people voted for Trump also that he would end the wars. So it'd be very unpopular if he doesn't. But again, this from Peskov is why I believe that this deal could be good for Ukraine, and this is not what the Kremlin wanted. I've said this many times. Trump's unpredictability is why I don't believe the Kremlin wanted them in. A Harris presidency would have looked exactly like a Biden presidency. This is why many people didn't vote for Harris, because it's like, we don't want the same thing again. The Kremlin would look at and go, well, we are making ground at the front line. We are moving. If it's predictable, we will just take more ground, maybe put ourselves in a better way. But also, on the flip side, for Ukraine, this unpredictability, if Russia doesn't come to the table, the unpredictability of Trump may go, fuck it, we're bombing this. We're going to bomb this thing if Russia doesn't do this, or we're going to give you the long-range structure of this or that and further escalate. People have said that Trump is more willing to escalate than Kamala would have been. That's why for Ukraine, I think they may get a better deal out of this, maybe more arms, maybe more strikes, maybe more policy, or on the flip side, at least have someone who has done hard deals before in business who will broker, hopefully, a better deal if that is what it comes to. Former US official who was familiar with the Putin call said that Trump likely does not want to enter office with a fresh crisis in Ukraine prompted by Russian escalation, giving him incentive to want to keep the war from worsening again. This is why maybe those long-range strikes that talked about in the beginning may hold off. They may not want that because it could make a humanitarian crisis and a crisis of refugees into Europe as well. Trump may not want to enter with that, may going, what do we need to do to not have your planes doing this? We will see. Ukraine requires billions of dollars in economic and military support every month to continue to fend off its bigger and better equipped foe, which has made significant military advances in recent months. But these billions in every month and ground is still being lost and recruitment still isn't meeting its targets. It's going to need way more, to the factor of 5 to 10, to get a force that can go back on the offensive and push back also. Further, while Trump has not spelled out the plan to end the war, he said that it would have benefited Ukraine to make a deal earlier in the war as the country continues to lose soldiers, civilian and infrastructure. Remember, he said at a speech in North Carolina, any deal, the worst deal, would have been better than what we have now. If they had made a bad deal, it would have been much better. They would have given up a little bit and everybody would be living, every building would be built, and every tower would be aging for another 2,000 years. What deal can we make? It's demolished. The people are dead. The country is in rubble. Now, the country is not in rubble. You go to Kyiv. To be honest, in Kyiv, you walk around, not as many men are out because many men are on the front or hiding from recruitment officers, but Kyiv does look like a very normal city. Go out, drink beers on the town. But this is very similar to what Professor Mearsheimer has been saying. People that think Mearsheimer is some sort of Putin puppet, Kremlin, whatever, don't understand just different opinions than they have, and he's probably significantly more smarter than you and I and people, whatever. But what he's been saying is that late 22, after Kharkiv, Kherson offensives, that was the high waterline. That was the best time to do it. Now we're 2 years beyond that, that if it was ended there, and he was saying at that point, then things would be getting rebuilt, other actions would be coming into place. But as far as territory, that was the high waterline, and we will see if Mearsheimer is correct or not in that. The end of 22, after those from Russia on the back foot, that was the best time to negotiate because they were on the back foot for offensive actions, the military being blown apart, whatever. And like I've said, if West was ever going to deploy soldiers, that was when it may have, and Russia may have actually pulled out. I think there was a missed opportunity there. Many people are saying this. There was missed opportunities in 2022 to give more aid, mobilise more men, or potentially even send in other soldiers. Now, this is something which I'm going to do in tomorrow's video, but I just want to give quickly before, as a bit of a teaser before we go into this. The difference between rhetoric and reality. While Russia makes broad statements about eliminating Ukraine, their consistent and achievable goal has been preventing NATO membership. So if you look at what is consistent, that is it, more so than territory. As far as what amount of territory. The truly existential threat is the political survival of Ukrainian leaders who have staked their position on an unobtainable NATO membership. Remember, this is still an opinion from someone. That they're saying it's unobtainable, but the political survival is that is the only way forward, but not to Ukraine as a nation. This helps explain why the conflict continues despite Russia's inability to achieve its maximalist stated aims. So stated aims, if it talks about elimination here or more, that has been seen as that Russia has the inability to do this so far. Again, nothing is impossible, but it does look like that. But why it has been so consistent on wanting to prevent NATO membership, and what he's saying is that because one, Russia don't want that, but also Ukrainian leaders have staked, as he's saying, their position on that membership, that is going to be a real problem politically, internally, if that doesn't become. And could there be in some sort of deal, Putin go, we'll give you back Luhansk for NATO for 30, 40 years, 20 years, indefinitely, that Ukraine's not in NATO. And I believe that Putin may actually take a 20-year, if there's Ukraine can't join NATO for 20 years, that's going to be effectively, I think, probably just as bad as not joining because there's going to be so many problems. We don't know how things are going to look like a decade down the path, but he is correct, and I'll share more of this tomorrow, about, with sources and everything, about the consistent element has been not joining NATO rather than the we're going here, we're going there, whatever. It's been to prevent NATO membership. Could there be some deal there of, well, for another 10 years, instead of 20 years joining, how about 30 years and we'll give you back some of that? That could be an interesting piece. Anyway, legends, have a great day and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.